You can't tell. So I'm going to be not authentic. Don't tell all my French friends this. I'm going to pronounce the X as an S. So you can tell that I mean more than one. So I'll say Batteaux for plural, even though I'm not supposed to. Okay. Well, my job is to tell you about Batteau navigation on the Dan River. The Dan is not the only river that had Batteau traffic, but certainly it made a big difference on the Dan. In 1879, the Danville Times reported Major Moorhead's Batteaux are in full blast now. He has 3 running regularly from Danville to Hairston's Ford, 15 miles above Madison, and 65 from Danville. That was quite a trip. The boats have a capacity of 10 tons down and 8 up. You realize that means downstream and upstream. And the charge is 25 cents per 100 each way from Danville to Leakesville and 35 cents to Madison. Goods were shipped in barrels, wooden barrels then, so they could lay barrels down side by side. And if you see a sketch of a Batteau, you often will see it with the barrels lined up on it. So you'll understand why it's pictured that way. This commercial venture had its origin in 1792 when Captain Jeremiah Wade poled the adventure gig upriver into Stokes County, North Carolina, proving that Batteaus could navigate the river that far. A Batteau was a double-ended, shallow draft, flat-bottom watercraft, like here, that varied from 40 to 60 feet long and 8 feet wide. This one is 40 feet. So imagine adding 20 more feet to that. That's quite a long craft, so you understand why they could carry lots of tons of goods. It was 8 feet wide, but it could draw only a foot of water, which means it could really travel on very shallow water. So that was crucial to navigating the Dan, because it got shallower the further upstream you went. It was steered by long sweeps on the bow and stern. The largest Batteaus could carry up to 12,000 pounds of cargo. Prior to the Civil War, the boats were captained and crewed mostly by African Americans, both enslaved and free. In the late 19th century, black Batteaumen in the river ports were described as important persons who wielded a certain amount of influence in the community. 3 Rockingham County Batteaumen listed in the 1870 census were Jack, Isham, and Robert Broadnax. Batteau navigation stimulated an economic boom in the entire valley. So this is a picture of the Dan River Basin. The Dan River Basin is the Dan River Valley. So we've got Virginia and North Carolina. The river, the Dan River, crosses the border 8 times. And if you're on the river and you cross the border, you don't know it. There's no sign that says you're now entering North Carolina or you're now entering Virginia. And there are no mile markers that say, well, that's where it's going to be. But the river just sort of sews those 2 states together. Batteau navigation stimulated an economic boom. New towns were chartered: Leakesville, Madison, Milton, Danville. Existing towns expanded as river ports. Each of those I've just named became a river port. For the first time, the region was connected to the global economy since its products could reach the major port of Norfolk, Virginia. Sent downriver were bulk agricultural products: tobacco, flour, grains, and cotton. It reminds me of what's happening in Ukraine right now. They're trying to ship their grain out. And that was major for them. That's major for the Dan River Basin, because they grow the crops and then they've got to sell them somewhere. So they could be loaded onto a Batteau and shipped to Norfolk, and they could be sold to anywhere from there, because Norfolk was a major port. The return voyages upstream brought tools, farm implements, and a variety of household and store goods. During the Civil War, Batteaus were vital links in moving supplies hauling coal to Danville from mines at the mouth of Buffalo Creek. The shipping manifests reveal cargoes that sometimes brought special items from the far, including, for example, a piano, porcelain dishes from China, and a barrel of oysters. Somebody had a really good picnic that night. To enable Batteaux to navigate shallow waters through the rapids, the Roanoke Navigation Company was chartered in North Carolina and Virginia in 1815. The company constructed canals around the falls in the Roanoke River and at Danville, Virginia. It cleared channels and constructed sluices through rapids, rock ledges, and fish weirs. Fish weir may be a little strange idea to you, but if you've been in the MARC, you probably have seen a picture of a fish weir. A fish weir was just a V-shaped rock structure that was put on the bed of the river. So, and it would funnel water into a V point where there was a small opening, and these were built by Native Americans. And they would just put a basket at that opening at the V, and the fish would be forced to swim toward that opening and go into the basket. So that's how they got their fish. It's pretty brilliant. And these lasted so long that they were often used by white settlers and black settlers who moved in to the valley. And when you wanted to run a batteau that was 8 feet wide through that little opening at the end for the basket was a little too small. So they widened it a bit. Just take a few stones away and you've got it wide enough. Now, I'm saying that sound as if it's easy to pick up those stones and move them. Believe me, when you're walking around in the river barefoot on a bunch of rocks that are slippery, it's not that easy. By 1828, there were 112 miles of the Dan River open from Clarksville, Virginia at the mouth of the river, which is way down here, to Madison, North Carolina, way upstream, which was as far upstream as they could go. So that was considered the head of navigation. In an era when water provided the only reliable transportation, the navigation project opened 10,000 square miles of backcountry foothills to a brighter economic future. Prior to that, they couldn't sell their stuff most anywhere. In North Carolina and Virginia, between Madison and Milton now, there are 33 19th century navigation structures known on the Dan River in the two states. That includes wing dams, sluices, and landings. These structures are more numerous upstream as the river becomes more rocky and shallow further upstream, so you need more support for navigation. Sluices are channels that are cleared through the rapids, usually parallel lines, and they may sometimes be a V. They may follow that pattern of the navigation, the Native Americans. Current is concentrated by the walls, just as the fish were forced to go down that V. The boat going through there would be forced to go in that direction. Wing dams are stone or log and stone walls projecting from each bank. Stone fish weirs may have been built by Amerindians and could be as much as 1,000 years old. Usually shaped as a V or occasionally a W if you got a double one. They were modified with a 10-foot opening to allow the Batteau passage. In 1984, 23 navigation structures found in the Dan River in Rockingham County were recognized by the National Register of Historic Places. This is the first Batteau navigation system to be nominated in the United States. We bought some boxes of files from my husband's collection of files to get things a little extra space in my garage. But at least one of those boxes has some pictures from his nomination of these structures to the National Register. He had a good time doing that, and there are photos that he took and showed slides to his classes of this. So I brought those, I think. They weren't labeled clearly enough for me to know for sure. But there are state historical markers at Licksville Landing in Eden. If you cross the river, you would have seen that one. And at Slink Shoal Sluice, just below the US 220 bridge over the Dan River. Slink Shoal Sluice and wing dams constitute the crown jewel of the entire system, the longest sluice and the only surviving log crib wing dams on the river. The log crib means that they built as if you were getting ready to start a log cabin. So you have just a rectangle built of logs, and then you fill that with rocks. So that holds it in place. And those wing dams from the side give you a channel right down the middle, which is really a cool thing to do. Then, I navigated that a lot of times, and that was a lot of fun. Gave you a good ride. Licksville Landing, which dates from the 1820s, is the only known Batteau port in the nation, with its log and stone mooring cribs and wharf. Now, logs that remained underwater survive for many years, but as they become exposed to air, they deteriorate. Some of the mooring cribs that are just upstream from Licksville Landing are beginning to disappear as the water levels rise and fall through the seasons. So as they get exposed to air, they begin to crumble. And that's a shame, because it's unusual to have those. The James River in Virginia has hosted a Batteau festival for several years, for which volunteers have constructed Batteau replicas. The 40-foot boat we have here is one of those replicas, purchased by the Dan River Basin Association and used for several years by Three Rivers Outfitters for public outings on the dam near Eden. The model for these replicas was obtained by the archaeological discovery of a canal basin in Richmond, Virginia, where several Batteaus had been sunk. These boats provided accurate measurements and construction information. All right, I'm going to look at one person who knows, Julia, about propelling a Batteau, because you've done that many a time. And Ashley has too. Okay, so we got two experts back here. I sent this to Mark Bishopwick to ask him to critique it, and I never heard from him, so it's up to you ladies to fix the mistakes in this. Let me read what I've got, and then you tell us what I need to fix. To propel a Batteau, each crew member holds a long pole that they plant straight down into the riverbed beside the boat. The crew member holds firmly to the pole while walking along the side of the boat. There's some platforms along the edges here. You'll see it on both sides. And as they walk along there, the boat moves in the direction the crew are walking. Is that right? I got nods. Good. If you didn't hear that, she said, be sure you don't walk off the plank. As the boat goes downstream, the current can often propel the boat without the need for poling. So that's why it's cheaper to float downstream than it is to go upstream. A sweep on the bow and another on the stern steer the boat. It's like having a rudder at both ends. And the cool thing about having it at both ends is when you get where you're going, what was the front becomes the back as you go the other direction. What was the back becomes the front. So you still got that sweep on the end that you needed. And they work together, you hope, and so that you'll go in a straight line. Okay, sweep on the bow and another on the stern, steer the boat whether it's headed upstream or down. For a century, the Batteau was the dominant vessel of transportation and commerce on the river. In the 1880s, the U.S. Corps of Engineers widened the sluices, enabling small steamboats to travel on the river. Now, we're not talking about the Mississippi steamboats. We're talking about, if you ever seen the movie that has the little bitty steamboat, the African Queen. Some of us are old enough to nod. We've seen that movie. Though a lot of young people probably haven't seen that yet, but it's worth looking at. It's Humphrey Bogart. It's a great movie. And there's this little bitty steamboat kind of putting along. That's what they were talking about here, small something. Nothing quite big with a big paddle wheel. We didn't have that kind of water. If they tried to do that on the Dan River, there'd just be rocks against it over and over again to tear the whole thing apart. The Batteau era ended when railroads penetrated the upper valley in the late 19th century. When the railroad made it to Danville, that meant you could unload everything at Danville and put it on the railroad cars and not have to be on the river anymore. So that ended the Batteau era. A few Batteaus were still used for social outings. I've read about Sunday school trips, taking people out. Maybe you take your garden club out to go look at something. Sometimes the Batteaus were pulled like a barge by the small steamboat. Today, the navigation structures still enable boats to pass easily over the rapids and ledges. That means that even when we have a severe drought, you can still navigate the Dan River because the obstacles are dealt with by this navigation system. You've got sluices to help you pass. You've got the wing dams to concentrate that water. So even though there's not much water, there's enough to float it because the Batteau only needed a shallow amount of water. The riverboats today are kayaks and canoes. But we thank the humble, practical Batteau for causing the improvements in the river that we can still enjoy. So when you come and look at this, think about spending day after day after day on a boat like this. There was hard work to it, but there was also a certain amount of freedom. The manifest for the boat had to be signed by the boat captain when it got to port. And in many cases, that signature is an X. Because we're talking about pre-Civil War, and it was illegal for anyone of African descent to read and write. So the X was the best they could do. They could not sign their name. They were not allowed to sign their name. They might know how, but they didn't dare let anybody know they knew how. So that tells you that these were African Americans who were signing the manifest as the captain of the boat. So this was, no wonder these were honored people in the various ports. They were very important people because they enabled the economy to work. If you have any questions, ask Julie. And Ashley will correct her if she needs to.